Ma'am, this is a restricted military zone. Step away from the vehicle. She slid out from under the truck, sweat on her brow, grease on her arm, calm as stone. Just fixing a hose. I'll be gone in 10. Not your choice, a soldier barked. Call a tow. Now. But then, an unmarked SUV rolled up. A 4-star general stepped out, spotted the tattoo on her shoulder, a skull inside a shield, and froze. He saluted. And in that instant, every young soldier realized they hadn't just confronted a stranger. They'd nearly ordered a ghost of legend off the base she once saved. Subscribe now, because stories like this are too powerful to be forgotten. The late summer heat hung like a wet blanket over the Carolina backroads, the kind that settled into your clothes and refused to leave. Helen Monroe squinted through the cracked windshield of her van as the engine gave one final sputter, coughed, then fell into silence. No warning, no last gasp, just dead quiet. She coasted onto a narrow gravel service road, the kind that ran forgotten along the outermost fence of Fort Liberty, and let the old girl roll to a stop beneath a half-wilted pine. Of course, she muttered, sliding the gear into park. The dashboard thermometer blinked 98 degrees. The radio had died 2 counties ago. She popped the hood with a practiced tug and stepped out, the gravel crunching under her scuffed boots like dry bones. The air smelled like dust, scorched rubber, and distant jet fuel. Somewhere past the tree line, cadence echoed faintly, boots slamming asphalt in rhythm. Helen didn't look up. Her eyes were already under the hood, tracing the lines of an engine she knew better than some of the people who'd served beside her. Steam hissed from beneath the radiator. She clicked her tongue and grabbed a rag from the back pocket of her jeans. Just a hose, she said, more to herself than to the van. Just one cracked hose and a little patience. She ducked down, unlatched her toolbox, and dropped to one knee. The gravel bit into her skin through the fabric, but she didn't flinch. She'd knelt in worse places. She rolled beneath the van, flashlight clamped between her teeth, wrench in hand. Metal clanged. A faint leak hissed somewhere near the intake valve. Found it. As she reached upward, her tank top slid slightly across her shoulder, revealing the edge of an old tattoo. A black skull inside a silver shield, twin rifles crossed beneath it. Wings barely visible now, under faded ink and sun-worn skin. It caught the sun just so sharp, stark, unmistakable to anyone who'd ever known what it meant. But there was no one around yet. Just the sound of tools clicking, a woman with grease on her forearms, and a van that had decided to stall in the shadow of a base that once thought she didn't exist. The first voice came sharp and flat, slicing through the stillness like a drill sergeant's bark. "Ma'am, this is a restricted zone." Helen didn't flinch. The bolt she was working on was rusted and stubborn, and her wrench had just found the right angle. The socket clicked. She gave it another turn, slow and steady. Sweat slid down her temple, stinging the edge of her eye. Gravel pressed into her spine, sun baked the undercarriage above her, and the voice came again, closer this time, firmer. "You need to step away from the vehicle immediately." Still, she didn't answer. Her eyes stayed focused on the leaking hose clamp, her hands moving with the kind of quiet certainty that came from fixing more broken things than most people ever touched. She adjusted the grip, twisted hard, felt the give. A sigh of satisfaction escaped her lips. Boots crunched. 3 sets. Heavy, unsure, but trying hard to sound like they belonged. Helen heard the gravel shift, recognized the cadencino marching, but posturing. She knew the difference. "Ma'am, do you hear me? This is federal property." She slid the wrench onto the bumper and scooted out slowly, head first. The sun hit her like a slap. She blinked, squinting into the daylight, and pulled the rag from her back pocket to wipe her face. Her hair was damp beneath the brim of her cap, and a thin streak of grease ran down one cheek. She sat up, resting her arms on her knees. "Didn't park," she said evenly, voice dry, broke down. The tallest of the three stepped forward. Early 20s. Shaved too close. His uniform was perfect, but his eyes were still too green. Clipboard in hand, like that made him an authority on who belonged and who didn't. He nodded toward the chain-link fence, just 50 feet away. You're within proximity of an active perimeter. That's not authorized. Helen didn't argue. She reached for the wrench again, calm as ever. I'll be gone in 15. You can't be here, said the second soldier, jaw tight. You need to call a tow. I'm fixing it, she said simply. But the third soldier had gone quiet. His gaze had drifted down just slightly to her shoulder, where the tank top had slipped again. The sunlight caught it. A black skull inside a silver shield, aged but unmistakable. His brow furrowed. He took a small step back. What is that? He murmured. He didn't recognize it, not fully. But something in his gut told him that Mark didn't belong to just anyone. Not a stranded traveler. Not a retired mechanic. Not someone who looked at him like she'd seen 1,000 versions of him before. Helen didn't answer. She just looked at him, not unkind, not defiant, and then reached for her wrench like the conversation was over. For her, it was. The gravel hadn't even finished settling under the soldier's boots when a new sound cut in low, even, controlled. Tires. Wider. Heavier. Not the skitter of a Humvee, but the muted purr of something higher up the chain. The three young men turned in unison as the black SUV crested the service road's bend, sunlight glinting off the government plates and tinted windows. It pulled in without urgency, without the aggression that usually came with authority. It stopped a few feet behind the military vehicle, engine idle, silent. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the rear door opened. The soldiers snapped straighter than they already were. No commands had been given, but posture was instinctive when rank stepped out. 4 stars on the collar. General Marcus Hayward. His dress was subdued plain fatigues, no chestful of ribbons, no aides barking clearances, but his presence was unmistakable. Built like a man who still ran hills by choice, gray streaking through his close-cropped hair, eyes hard from memory rather than ego. He surveyed the scene like a battlefield, every detail noted, filed, processed. His gaze stopped at Helen. He saw the van first, then the grease on her arms, the sweat on her brow. Her sleeves rolled high, and then his eyes fell to the tattoo on her left shoulder. The air changed. No one heard him exhale, but it was clear he had. His jaw tensed, throat shifted. One hand came up slowly, deliberate, every movement carved with meaning. Fingers touched temple, held there in a perfect, silent salute. No one moved. Not the soldiers, still confused but aware now that the rules had shifted. Not Helen, who blinked once and pushed her cap slightly up from her brow, unsure of what to make of the gesture. The gravel beneath them might as well have turned to marble. Even the birds seemed to quiet. She didn't salute back, not yet, but she nodded just once. It was all she needed to do. Hayward lowered his hand, stepped forward. His eyes hadn't left hers. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice thick with something older than protocol. "Are you Ghost 7? Helen didn't smile, but she stood. "Used to be." The soldiers stood like statues, eyes flicking between Helen and the general, confusion blooming into something heavier. Hayward didn't look at them. His focus never left her. "Helen Monroe," he said, quiet but clear. "Ghost 7. The name dropped like a stone into still water. The youngest soldier, the one who'd held the clipboard like a shield, visibly swallowed. The others shifted their weight, unsure if they should still be standing at attention or kneeling instead. They were staring at someone who, 5 minutes ago, was just a sweaty woman under a van. Now she wasn't. Ghost 7. The name stirred something in the air. Old stories told in low voices during night shifts. Rumors that never made the official briefings but got passed between bunkmates like contraband. A unit that wasn't in the manuals, that didn't show up in after-action reports. A patch seen only once or twice in decades, on arms that disappeared before sunrise. Helen tilted her head slightly, studying the general. Her face was blank, unreadable. But there was a flicker behind her eyes, something ancient and tired. "You were at Firebase Kestrel," she said, not asking. Hayward nodded once. "April 2010. Ridge 3 collapsed. We were cornered on the southern flank. You lost your comms," she said. "We monitored your position, dropped a drone strike for cover. And you pulled 2 of my men out from under the barracks roof." Helen didn't respond immediately. Her jaw worked once. Then she nodded, just a breath. Neither of them smiled. There was no need. Recognition wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just eye contact, and a name remembered through smoke and shrapnel. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was sacred. The general finally turned to his soldiers. His voice clipped, but not harsh. "She is not to be disturbed," he said. "She is to be assisted, and someone get a mechanic out here, now." The clipboard dropped to the soldier's side. Forgotten. One of them turned and jogged toward the Humvee, radio already in hand. Helen exhaled slowly. The air hadn't cooled, but something in her chest had loosened. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a ghost. She just felt seen. The mechanic arrived 15 minutes later, mid-40s, sleeves rolled, oil stains like tattoos up both forearms. He didn't salute, didn't question, just gave Helen a quiet nod, the kind passed between people who'd both seen something burn and walked away from it. He popped the hood and got to work without asking what was wrong. She appreciated that. Helen leaned back against the bumper, arms crossed, one boot hooked behind the other. Her shirt clung damp to her back, and the sun had begun to edge west, turning the gravel golden and long-shadowed. Somewhere behind her, the general made a call. Somewhere to her left, one of the young soldiers kept stealing glances, still unsure whether to speak or apologize. She didn't care for either. The van pitted, rusted in places, stubborn as a mule was, more than just a way to get from state to state. It was a vessel, a pilgrimage machine. Every dent had a city. Every stain on the upholstery had a memory she hadn't been ready to let go of. The dashboard still held the old photograph, tucked behind a cracked compass, faded black and white, the edges curling. 2 women in combat gear, dust streaked across their faces, smiles defiant and worn. One was Helen, decades younger. The other Rachel Dawson, brighter, quicker to laugh. The kind who carried med kits heavier than standard and never let anyone bleed alone. Helen glanced at the picture like it might speak. "I told you I'd go," she murmured, voice low. "One state at a time." The road trip wasn't about sightseeing. It wasn't even about escape. It was a debt. A vow made when her hands were still shaking and the helicopter blades still thudded overhead. Rachel hadn't made it onto the last bird out of Yalres. She'd pushed Helen forward and said, "You better keep your promise." So Helen drove, not to forget, but to remember the right way. Through diners and gas stations and quiet American places that smelled like freedom and diesel and sun. Through back roads and cities, and now, Hara-gravel biting at her heels just outside Fort Liberty, the place where history had finally caught up with her. The mechanic called over his shoulder, "You loosened this bolt?" Helen smirked. "I was being gentle." He chuckled. She didn't. She wasn't here to laugh. She was here to keep a promise. The room smelled faintly of dust and bleach. No flags hung from the walls, no plaques or framed citations. Just rows of folding chairs lined up in a space that looked more like a converted rec hall than anything ceremonial. The ceiling fans whined overhead, pushing warm air around like they were trying, but not too hard. Fluorescent lights flickered in one corner. The podium had seen better decades. Helen stood near the back, arms folded, the edge of her boot resting on a scuffed floor tile. She didn't belong here. Not really. But when General Hayward had asked, he hadn't made it an order. He'd just said, they should hear it. From someone who knows. So now she watched as they filed in young men and women in crisp uniforms, fresh faces trying to mask nerves with stillness. A few older NCOs stood along the walls, arms crossed, their eyes sharper, their silence heavier. No one introduced her. No PowerPoint, no background music to smooth it out. Just Hayward stepping to the front with a mic in one hand and a short breath before he began. We talk a lot in here about readiness, he said. Tactics, logistics, what we do. But today you're going to hear something about why. He turned, and everyone followed his gaze to the woman by the door. Helen didn't move at first. Then she walked slow, even. No podium. She didn't need it. She stopped a foot from the front row, tugged the strap of her tank top slightly aside, exposing the faded ink on her shoulder. The skull. The rifles. The wings. You ever owe somebody the rest of your life? She asked, voice even. I do. Silence. Not strained. Just respectful. She nodded once. Yalrez Valley. 7 of us. No air support. Just orders. We weren't supposed to be there long. Turned into 2 days of gunfire and dust and trying not to die. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. She told them about the downed bird, the last evac rope, the wounded airman she dragged uphill. And Rachel, covering their retreat, refusing to board, telling Helen with a half smile, "You owe me a road trip. Don't waste it." She paused then. No tears. Just quiet. I didn't come back to tell stories, she said. I came back because promises matter. The soldiers didn't applaud. They didn't shift. They just listened, like church. Like they understood that something sacred was being handed to them, and they were being trusted not to drop it. The room emptied slowly, not because anyone was told to stay, but because no one quite wanted to be the first to leave. A few soldiers nodded to her as they passed. Some gave her a quiet, "Ma'am." Others just offered a glance that lingered a little longer than it needed to. No applause, no music. Just the sound of boots on tile and reverence that hung in the air like the dust stirred from folding chairs. Helen stayed where she was, one hand resting on the edge of the podium she hadn't used. The space was warmer now, not in temperature but in feeling like something old had been given breath again. General Hayward approached without ceremony, a small box in his hand. It was weathered, plain, no ribbons, no velvet lining, no inscription on the outside. He didn't open it right away. "I don't have a medal for you," he said. "Not even sure you'd take one." "I wouldn't," Helen said. He nodded, like he already knew. Then he flipped the box open with his thumb. Nestled inside was a coin-solid burnished silver. A 5-pointed star etched at its center, and below it, in raised script, "For honor. For silence." She didn't say anything, didn't need to. "It's not official," Hayward said. "We only give them to the ones who never asked for anything." Helen looked at it for a long time. Her fingers were stained with engine grease and dust, and she hesitated for a moment before lifting it out. She turned it once in her palm, feeling the weight of it not heavy in ounces, but in what it meant. She didn't smile, but something in her face softened. "Not for me," she said, almost a whisper. "For Rachel." She closed her hand around it slowly, like it was a folded flag at a graveside, then slid it into her front pocket without ceremony. Hayward just nodded, eyes cast downward. "She'd have liked you," Helen said quietly. "You remember things." "I try," he replied. They stood there for another moment, 2 people tied together, not by rank or paperwork, but by a field on the far side of the world, and a woman who never made it home. Then Helen said, "Thank you," and meant it. He didn't say anything in return. Some things didn't need an answer. It started small. In the mess hall the next morning, someone turned the radio down. Not off, just lower enough that the usual thump of overplayed country songs faded into the background. The chatter didn't disappear, but it slowed. Conversations took longer to start. More forks scraped against trays. More glances drifted to the table near the window where Helen sat, nursing a black coffee she hadn't asked for, but accepted all the same. She noticed it in the hallway, too. The way one private paused before passing a retired staff sergeant, not out of confusion but deference. The way another nodded, not casual, not distracted, but full-on acknowledgement, like he was suddenly seeing someone he used to walk past without a second thought. In the motor pool, two mechanics leaned against the wall, not talking, just watching the sunrise peel back across the tarmac like something holy. One of them said, "You hear what she said about crawling uphill?" The other just nodded, slowly. The ripple was never loud. It wasn't a shift that came with orders or briefings or a new line in a handbook. But it was there, like water tracing a new groove into stone. Young soldiers started asking questions, not in groups, not on record, but quietly, one-on-one. A corporal inquired about Jalri's Valley. A specialist asked his senior what Ghost 7 really was. The older soldiers didn't say much, but they answered now, not to boast, but to preserve. In the corner of the base library, a book long forgotten, Unconventional Warfare Tactics, 2003 edition, was quietly pulled off the shelf, not by an officer. By a 21-year-old with a notebook in his back pocket, and too many questions for one conversation. Helen saw it all, from the shade of the motor pool bay, from the corner seat at Chow, from the quiet bench near the flagpole where she sipped her second cup of coffee and listened to cadence echo across the concrete. She hadn't planned on this. She didn't come to teach. But something had settled into the foundation of the place, a shift in posture, in breath, in what it meant to wear the uniform. She hadn't just fixed a truck. She'd recalibrated a compass. And now, quietly, the next generation was learning how to walk by it. The sun hung low over Fort Liberty, casting long shadows across the concrete and catching on the edges of chain link and barbed wire like gold trapped in steel. The air had cooled just enough to hint at evening, but the heat still clung to the pavement, rising in soft waves behind her as Helen turned the key and coaxed the van to life. It rumbled like it remembered how to breathe. She sat there for a moment, engine idling, her hand resting on the steering wheel, the other on the photo on the dash. Rachel's grin, all grit and sunlight, stared back at her like it always did. Helen traced the edge of the frame with a grease-stained thumb. "Still with me." The van eased forward toward the checkpoint, tires crunching gravel in a rhythm she could almost sync her heartbeat to. There were no fanfares, no handshakes, no photographers waiting to immortalize her exit. Just the wide-open gate and a single soldier standing post, fresh-faced, a little sunburned, helmet slightly crooked. He looked straight ahead as she approached, one hand resting on the barrier lever. Helen rolled down the window halfway, gave him a nod, tired, quiet, enough. She expected the same in return. Maybe a clipped, "Ma'am," maybe just silence. But the soldier did something else. He lifted two fingers to his temple, held them there for a breath, then tapped them over his heart. No words. No smile. Just the motion, clean, exact, full of something deeper than protocol. The Ghost Company sign. Her breath caught, not from surprise but from the weight of it. That gesture wasn't in any training manual. You didn't see it on parade grounds or in morning formations. It belonged to the shadows, to operations written in invisible ink, to people who never came home but never really left either. Helen returned it slowly, two fingers to the temple, a soft touch to the chest. No flourish, just truth. Then she shifted the van into drive, easing past the guard shack and back onto the road. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Some signs didn't need an audience. They just needed to be seen.